Hey, everybody, Steve here. Thank you so much for listening in. Talking about Bitcoin tonight. If you've been following Bitcoin, which you might have a little bit just because it's been in the news lately with the price volatility all over the place, you might have some questions. So, this is tonight. Whether you're here in person, whether you're at home online, I want you to put all the hard questions into the text or wherever you have to put it there so we can get those answered for you. If I don't answer them tonight, I will get back to you on with the answer with that. So what we're going to talk about tonight, a little bit of education. I'm not going to teach you Bitcoin. We're talking, that's on you to learn. I'm going to talk a little bit about the education behind it, where you can find more information. I'm going to talk about the thesis and conviction of Bitcoin. So thesis is why, how much you believe in, or why you believe to invest in it. And then conviction is kind of how much you believe that. We're going to talk about the performance. I'll get it right out front. Bitcoin is down on the year. So if you'd have talked to me a year ago, I would have said 200,000 by the end of 2025. Lock it up. A lot of others said that too, and it did not actually happen. So right now, so we're just going to shift that a year and say 200,000 by the time in 2026. But you'll see a little bit more on the performance there. We're going to talk about the regulatory changes and why those are successful and a tailwind for not just Bitcoin, but all of crypto. And we'll talk about the 2026 outlook. As with anything, their standard disclaimer applies. Please pause here. If you are at home, you can read that in its entirety. Basically, these are forward-looking projections by me and my opinions alone. Where can you get more information? Well, first of all, I do have to brag. If you see the video down below at the bottom of your screen, that is a couple weeks ago when we hosted Fong Lee, who's the CEO of Strategy, formerly known as MicroStrategy, and they're the Bitcoin treasury company. He was standing exactly where I am and presenting their thesis on about Bitcoin itself, why they're acquiring as much as they are, and then what the long-term projection is. It's far more bullish than anything I could even imagine. I'm going to give you Steve's representation from that. But with Bitcoin, I treat it like the internet, or the fact that how much you understand about a microwave, like when you plug a box in the wall and it magically heats up food, is you can learn everything about it, but you don't need to know everything about it to use it. Same story. If you want to learn about it, there's 7 or 8 books across the top there. I will be full disclosure. I've not read any of those books. I read the white paper, which is down below. And if you remember, bitcoin.org/bitcoin.pdf, easy to remember, or just Bitcoin white paper. That's about 30 pages. It's really all you need to know for Bitcoin education. If you read that, you're going to have a couple different reactions. One of them is, yep, still don't get it. Or you're going to have heck yeah energy coming up for reading that paper, like everything, it makes sense. I think every paragraph of that whole paper was crystal clear to me on why Bitcoin belongs in this world, and that's why we invest in it. I borrowed the line though. If you truly want to learn Bitcoin, it takes about 100 hours to become functionally knowledgeable. Again, if you want to go down the rabbit hole on this thing, you can. It's kind of like the early days of the internet. There's people that wanted to learn the hows and whys of how ones and zeros can magically do things. If you want that, it's there for you. If you just need how could this change the world, that's what you're going to hear tonight. Okay, thesis and conviction. Obviously, that's how we talk in terms of investing. What's the thesis? It's a hedge against the fiat currency debasement, inflation, and geopolitical instability. What does that mean? Okay, we are devaluing our money as a government. We always have, and for some reason, we pat ourselves on the back because we think it's a good idea. Reference the chart off to the side. That big red line that's going straight down is the value of your US dollar over time. That's the purchasing power. The real value in economic terms is basically, if you kind of zoom out for a second and think we as a government slash Fed slash president slash everybody's shooting for 2% inflation. And when we get it, we think that's a great idea. Well, this is what the world looks like with your purchasing power when you have 2% inflation or higher, right? So it's not a great system. We've survived so far, and the system's been in place for over 100 years. If we stay with this system, your money's literally going to deflate to zero, get debased to zero. And that's outside of the money printing piece. So that's just baked in. And then you have intentional currency debasement. You know about the national debt's 38 trillion. You know that we're going to go another 4 trillion in the hole this year with our budget. We tasked 2 guys that we both thought could cut government, Trump and Elon Musk. If they got together, they couldn't do it. Who can? So we're just going to keep spending money and printing money. If you've heard that money printer go burr, a lot of people think that's a funny joke, but it's actually kind of like the end of our fiat currency as we know it. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No, but we're trending in that direction. That's why you want to be in on the Bitcoin thesis. Now, geopolitical instability, that can happen at any point in time. Two countries have actually messed up their own currency so bad that they've gone to Bitcoin as their actual currency. So as you see, 200 plus different countries out there, as stuff happens and countries go under, which happens on a regular basis, right? They're going to come back as Bitcoin as their currency, right? And I think that will happen. Some key facts, you can kind of read through those at the bottom there. The important part is we're increasing that money supply by 7.7% a year. If you send out mailbox money, you don't have problems right away, but you may have problems over time, like we just keep printing, right? Bitcoin supply is finite. There's only going to be 21 million out there. It's achieved reserve asset status. That's huge. The U.S. has said we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Just by saying that gives it credibility. So it's not going back to zero. So if you keep worried about this as tulips or Cabbage Patch dolls or just a bunch of BS, it's not going back to zero. We're past that. Mathematical hard money, internet-based money, all those things are reasons to own it, and it's gaining approval as a collateral asset in the United States as well. Right now, if you have 5 million in Bitcoin and you go to buy a house, they will ask how much money you have in the bank and what's your income. You do not get to count your crypto. That's all changing. You'll get to count your crypto, and things are going to become a lot easier here. Okay. Nothing stops this train. That's Lynn Alden. There's really two pieces to that. Nothing stops the train of the US dollar going to zero. That's where it's going. And it's designed that way. If you think we're going to go into a deflation status of the US, no, we're never going to do it. And then nothing stops the Bitcoin train. That's Lynn Alden. Okay, here's the performance year to date. That was a snapshot earlier today. It's below that right now. I don't have it in front of me, but ultimately it's down for the year. So Steve, how could you be talking for the whole past year and this year of Bitcoin being the top investment in your portfolio when it's actually down on the year when pretty much everything else is up? Well, that's a good question. And yes, that has induced some pain. It's induced some fear, some uncertainty, and some doubt as to the long-term performance of Bitcoin. But if you zoom out past the year to date, you will see that it ripped higher after the election, right? Trump got elected and he's the first Bitcoin president, if you will, strategic reserve, all that stuff. Certainly had a lot of hype going into 2025. You can see on this chart at the end of summer and then again in October, we hit all-time highs up at 126,000, and then it started selling off recently. So the question is, why? Here's your why. The big banks who came out as a big supporter of Bitcoin, they started the Bitcoin ETFs. I'll show you a chart here in a minute how IBIT, the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF, was the fastest growing ETF in history of all ETFs, right? Fastest growing ever out of anything. Well, then the past couple months ago, the banks started to realize that if you count Bitcoin as collateral, that could invalidate a lot of traditional US banking functions. Literally, it's a threat to places like JP Morgan. I think Jamie Dimon is waking up to that fact. And then now he started throwing spears at MicroStrategy and how it would end the system if MicroStrategy ended up with all the money. Well, or all the Bitcoin. That's because Jamie Dimon's used to be in charge of all of the money, right? And now this is a direct competitor and it could directly challenge some fees coming out of the pockets of big banks. So big banks love it when they can collect fees on it. Don't love it as much since it's a traditional banking system. If you've heard me talk in depth about Bitcoin, there will be a day when we can do Bitcoin lending. I think it will happen in 2026, where if I have a Bitcoin wallet with 10 Bitcoin in it, arguably $900,000, and I want to loan against that to buy my house, it can happen in approximately 7 minutes, which is a little more efficient than the 30-day personal financial statement process that the bank puts you through. Even if you're worth a couple million, they still put you through the same process to vet you. That's all going away. I don't know when or how fast, but it is all going away. And that's a big threat to the banks and their big fat juicy fees, because every time you close on one of these loans, they're making $10, $20, $30,000. Okay, Texas. You know I love Texas. I chose to move here after the military. We could have lived anywhere. Texas is it. I could list 1,000 reasons why Texas has its act together. One of them is we just passed our own stock exchange. Why would we do that? I don't know. Maybe in case we leave the union someday. Oh, let's not go down that rabbit trail. But I will tell you that Texas is the first state to come up with a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and they just funded a $5 million initial purpose. $5 million does not go a long way in the Bitcoin world, but it's more than zero, which is everybody else. Arizona and New Hampshire are probably going to fall right behind, and several other states have shown some interest. But that's a big deal. If it gets adopted at the state level and it's at the national level, and there's several countries out there that are adopting it. Bitcoin just had its MENA conference, which is the Middle East conference, where Saylor was addressing specifically to sovereign nations over there that they should add this to their strategic reserves. Every tailwind in the book is out there for Bitcoin, in my opinion. Okay, several, I won't get into the regulatory stuff because it is boring and dry, but I will tell you it has gone from a less favorable environment to a more favorable regulatory environment. Several things have been passed, which allows validity and reduces the regulations out there, and it gives you some structured oversight for Bitcoin and crypto, which is very different from treating it as a criminal asset as it was going into this year. Also, it loses its cool factor. So when you think of who's selling here, well, remember Bitcoin, a lot of the OG Bitcoiners were the nerds that were mining in their dorm rooms and giving it to their friends and stuff that probably maybe rethought that move. But a lot of them are realizing some of their net worth now that it's very significant. Also, it's not cool. Like Larry Fink is like, ooh, that's a good common enemy of the people. Here's a super rich guy getting on TV going, I hate Bitcoin. 1 year later, I love Bitcoin. Come buy my ETF. And everybody does. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that's the he's like the least in common with Bitcoiners, right? Because he's a traditional banker. So the Genius Act is coming up. We do think that President Trump is obviously pro crypto. It established a federal framework for payment of stable coins, which is not a stable coin discussion. It's about Bitcoin, but really it bridges TradFi and crypto into one world, right? And once that happens, then things can go mainstream. When you think of like right now, the restaurant, I think it's Shake Shack. No, it's not Shake Shack. Steak and Shake is not only you can pay with your Bitcoin there. They pay employees in Bitcoin. So I mean, it's coming slowly over time, but it's coming. Okay, ETF dominance. This is what I was talking about before. That orange ETF off to the left, appropriately orange because it's the IBIT, which is the Larry Fink's ETF for BlackRock. That's the fastest to 70 billion ever of any ETF. And you look at the other ones, they're like, wow, those are kind of popular. VOO, most common stock ETF, GLD, internet, couple of international flavors there. Literally, the adoption of Bitcoin when these ETFs came out was insane. When you look at the far right, there's your top 20 ETFs. A Bitcoin only spot ETF is one of the top 20 largest in the world. So it's here. It's not going away. You need to get in on it while it's early, in my opinion. Okay, corporate treasury. We had Fong Lee from Strategy in here. Still thankful that we were able to make that happen. They haven't talked to us specifically, but what Strategy is doing is they're accumulating Bitcoin as a treasury company. Therefore, they can turn around, and even though he's obviously dodged the question of will you become a bank, yet when you have all the assets, you do become a bank and you lend out. You perform bank-like functions, I guess, is what he's talked about. But basically, they're around that 3% of all Bitcoin. He's talked openly and very recently about that going to a 5 to 7.5%. I tend to say 6. Who knows where it will end up? But the problem is that as he acquires, which happens every Sunday, he publishes a tweet which has the orange dot and has the value of exactly how much he's acquired. And this week, they actually not only acquired Bitcoin, they increased their US dollar reserve because there's concerns about them being able to pay their dividend on some of their stuff. Either way, they're accumulating assets, and it's going to become this one big, huge treasury company. It is bigger than the rest of them combined, and there probably is no way for them to ever be second fiddle to somebody. So if Bitcoin continues to go higher, which I think it will to the tune of at least 10x over time, not tomorrow, but over time, then you're going to see MicroStrategy as the biggest company in the world. And then you could argue that later on, if we need a Bitcoin treasury strategic reserve as the government, we will nationalize Strategy, just like we just did a portion of Intel, right? So there's a natural pathway for the US to go on a Bitcoin standard after coming off the gold standard years ago. We don't hold ourselves to the 2% standard, inflation standard as of this year with Powell's speech at Jackson Hole. Is maybe this happens in the future and it brings ourselves into somewhat of fiscal responsibility, or we just spend it all to zero. Bitcoin wins either way. Okay, there's a national strategic Bitcoin reserve. There was a lot of talk about this when Trump was first elected, and then he kind of backed off of it a little bit. So not really going out and actively buying Bitcoin, which Texas did, but just holding on to seized criminal holdings, right? So if they seize it, then just like everything else, they can add that to the reserve. Um, when the U.S. government says strategic Bitcoin reserve, that's the biggest fundamental shift in Bitcoin history. Okay, the government signed on, right? So that's a huge deal. You can't sit back and ignore it anymore. So that happened earlier this year. And then at the Bitcoin 2025 conference in Vegas, which I was there, I heard 8 of these 9 people speak in person, sitting in the crowd, listening to what they had to say. It was funny because the vice president was last, and I was sitting there in the audience, and I was like hoping it went off on time because I had to go to catch my ride at the airport, and fortunately it did. But I was willing to miss my plane ride home to make sure that I heard from the vice president himself. And yeah, they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying the exact same thing. So when you think of, okay, there's Michael Saylor traveling the world and talking Bitcoin, but when you have major players in the U.S. government, they're also singing to the same sheet of music. That is a big deal. So it's in place. It's in place enough to where a lot of folks ask me, it's just like, okay, so we have a mass change, a blue wave, maybe at the midterms, but certainly in the next general, the anti-Trump reaction, if we go completely blue as a country, is Bitcoin going to go away? And absolutely, absolutely not. It's too entrenched, in my opinion. Okay, here's your Bitcoin dominance. This is within the crypto space. How dominant is Bitcoin? Extremely dominant. So it's not really going to give way. I do think other cryptocurrencies or coins do poach money away from Bitcoin, but that's in waves. It kind of floats away when Ethereum is hot or XRP is hot, but then it kind of comes back, right? And the biggest thing here is Bitcoin is finite. The rest are not. They are created through their blockchain. So there's always going to be more out there where there will not always be more Bitcoin. Okay, predictions. Everybody loves a good prediction. So I will say, first of all, before you can make a prediction about going in the future, it's like, Steve, I know you already talked about this, but why were you saying 200,000 by the end of the year for 2025? And it wasn't even close. We actually went backwards. Well, I do love this quote. It's John Maynard Keynes up there in the upper part of the slide. Successful investing is anticipating the anticipations of others. Okay, what does that mean? So here's the event. Investors like to anticipate, right, before the event. So whatever the thesis is, you get out ahead of that. And then the really good investors get out ahead of the people that are anticipating things. Well, by doing that, sometimes you can be grossly early. And with that, you can have it to where, you start the year, you watch it run up to 125,000. It's on a clear path to 200 by the end of the year. Everybody's dancing around, slapping high fives. And then it doesn't happen. It head fakes and it goes back to new highs again. And then it drops significantly before the end of the year. Well, the consensus trap. That's why it's on the slide, is everybody kind of believed that's where it was going. However, there just wasn't enough momentum to go there. So therefore, a lot of times, things can become a self-licking ice cream cone, where if everybody believes it, then it becomes true. In this case, there just wasn't enough momentum there. There are too many sellers in the market. So therefore, it has to consolidate, which in a stock world, if you have a stock like Nvidia that runs up, it's all hot, everything's hot about it, then you have a whole bunch of people selling, a whole bunch of buying, and you get that chop. That's that consolidation period, which, hey, you have to work through that before it can move higher. That's where I think we are with Bitcoin. I wake up every day. Now I'm a natural optimist. Wake up every day thinking it's going to go higher. Today I was validated for about 4 hours, and then it sold back off again. But it's happened. And am I worried about it? I'm not worried about it. The long-term thesis is unchanged. Okay, so what's the catalyst for going higher? Is there a trigger? No. You think of stock triggers, you think of earning reports, leadership changes, new products. Those sorts of things are all clear triggers that could force the stock to move higher or lower. You don't have that with Bitcoin. Ultimately, it's time, and you have to be patient. If you want to get paid on this thesis, you're going to have to wait for it to actually happen. What to watch in 2026, there's the Clarity Act out there, which again will be more regulations that basically set the structure up for success for all of crypto. Monetary policy, we've had 3 rate cuts so far in 2025, which now we're done with that. And now into 2026, we'll have a new Federal Reserve chair probably within 30 days. That was likely to be very rate cut friendly, right? Because Trump likes to appoint people that will do his bidding. So therefore, I expect at least 3 more rate cuts next year. The end of quantitative tightening and the balance sheet expansion, if you will, for the Fed, if you understand all that stuff. All that's in place, right? So that means assets move higher. So what moves higher when I say assets move higher? Your house, real estate moves higher. Stocks move higher. Bonds don't, but stocks do. So it helps the market. You've got gold, you've got Bitcoin. So those are assets, and they all travel higher in a cheaper money environment. New all-time high potential. Yeah, I have to say, seeing the action going into 125 and then to 127,000, when it goes ripping higher, it moves. So it's not really a let's wait and see kind of asset, because when it moves, it moves. Now, has it stayed there? It has not. Right? So it doesn't mean you missed your entry, but certainly it's a momentum play that gets a lot of interest once it gets back towards new highs. So key takeaways: year of explosion, and we found that in one of the very Bitcoin friendly terms. So I wouldn't quite go as far as it's the year of explosion higher. I would happily stand here explosion, not implosion. The I'd happily love to stand here a year from now when it's at 250 or 300. Let's just say let's shoot for 200K again. That would be a nice double in a calendar year. Or in other words, be patient. This is by far the least predictable asset that we have out there. The 10-year ahead 10 crypto predictions. That's from Matt Hogan and his team at Bitwise. You can pause and read those if you like. Okay. Conclusions. One of the most interesting things that came across with Rick Edelman is he said, when you look at the global money supply and the global assets and a $1.7 trillion market cap, which is what Bitcoin has, that is between 2 and 3% of all assets. So therefore, if you're a very passive investor that said, I want to own everything, then you would have 2% Bitcoin. And there are still companies out there, Edward Jones, Vanguard, that says, no, too unsafe for you. So that's actually an active bet against Bitcoin, right? They're actively, not participating in an asset. So then the question becomes, as a fiduciary, would I be doing my job if I'm personally invested very much higher than that in Bitcoin and I don't put you in any, right? So instead of the risk being putting you into it, now the risk is kind of transferred to not having you in. Standard allocations, people out there are still saying 2 to 5%. If 2 to 5% happened in Bitcoin for everybody, that puts Bitcoin well over $1 million. So I think it'll happen. I don't know when. I kind of don't care. I'm a little impatient, like everybody in the room and listening online. I would like it to happen sooner than later, but it's going to happen. So I will sit there and wait patiently. Here at Anchor Star Wealth, if you invest with us, we are going to have variations of Bitcoin, the outright Bitcoin, as well as we have levered options, we have hedged options that go with it. But we're 2 to 3 times the standard here. So we're looking at anywhere from 4 to 16% in our portfolios in Bitcoin. So to say we believe is an understatement. Okay, that is what I have for the team here. Thanks for listening in. We will take questions. Do we have any questions coming in from the live group? One's brewing, I can tell.
Question in the room?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about portfolio balancing.
Okay.
Since you just brought up the allocation, because Bitcoin tends to rip,
Mhm.
when it does, it can really skew your allocation. So if you believe in the thesis and you rip and it 2x's, are we selling Bitcoin or are we still committed to the thesis?
Okay, so the question is, repeating it because we're tied in here, is for portfolio allocation, when you have, since Bitcoin tends to rip, volatility is much higher. When it rips higher, are you trimming Bitcoin like you normally would to buy the losers? Okay, great question. So I would answer it with this. If you want to do traditional portfolio rebalancing, then yes, you always sell your winners and buy the losers. I don't like that. I like to be a little more selective than just a natural rebalance. So what I tend to do is either increase that allocation and say that's the new allocation, which there's dangers in that, right? If you just simply move the goalpost and never rebalance, or you subtract it out of your portfolio and you go, okay, I have maybe 10% Bitcoin, but I'm actually going to just hold that, never sell your Bitcoin kind of thing, and then treat the other 90% as its own allocation and rebalance within there. So that's the way we tend to handle it here. If you sort of tax loss harvesting, if there's reasons to sell Bitcoin, then we'll sell it for you. But if we're just going to buy it right back in 30 days, that's not a great reason to sell. All right, good question. And shout out to Allie for this graphic that she put together. It's raining Bitcoin. So that'd be nice. Yes.
Do you think it's possible that MicroStrategy could be buy too much Bitcoin?
Okay, question is, could MicroStrategy buy too much Bitcoin? Well, take any asset in the world. If you buy all of it, then you're the fool, right? Nobody's going to buy it off your hands if you have all the gold. So there is a risk there. So at what point does that break the system? I would say it's probably up around 25% before you really run into that level. There's some natural headwinds out there. The headwind is your price. If they do make a run on Bitcoin, which they're doing, right, then the price eventually goes up high enough where they can't continue their run. They're buying less Bitcoin each time they go to buy. So they would be exhausted at some point to where they're just a holder and not be able to buy more. Other forces, there's other people out there trying to do the same thing. So as you now get into a race, you have natural forces that keep that somewhat in check, right? And the third piece is there are people that are exactly worried about that. And those people are trying to approach Bitcoin from a different way. If you remember Jack Dorsey, he's out there active for, I can't remember which company he's in charge of now, but he's obviously been active all over the tech world during his career. He is saying, specifically that if we don't use Bitcoin as a daily currency, then it's not ever going to really work. So he doesn't buy that it's just a store of value because you could run into the run on Bitcoin, right? If one person has it all, obviously it's useless. If 1,000 people have it all, then that's also kind of worthless too. So really, you kind of want that mass adoption. So I don't lay awake worrying about that. I think that's something to be assessed later, and it's certainly on the radar scope of things where all this could get derailed. So, good question.
I think the most exciting thing that Bitcoin brought to the table is it made a lot of very wealthy people who came in 15 years ago, gave $100 to their buddy, and so on and so forth. You're talking something that's 100,000 right now, give or take. Visions of going to 1 million. That's 10x. Can my money be put somewhere and have a better return than 10x over 10 years? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do.
We passed the windfall.
So the question becomes, obviously this started 15 years ago. A lot of people were early adopters and they've derived massive wealth from that. However, if you're listening to this today and you go read the paper, like Steve says, you buy all 8 books, you read, okay, I know you're not going to do that. But say you get excited about the thesis and you go, all right, well, Steve says that I could expect maybe a 10x, 10 years would be amazing. More than that would be, that's 100%. Yeah, but we'll see, right? But the question then becomes, and you're right, the attractiveness of all the other coins for sure, because crypto has this aura of super fast wealth out of nothing over, yeah, I don't like that, right? Because I tend to laugh at that, but it did happen with Bitcoin. The question is, are there better investments? I would say if you're looking for the most amount you can make, accepting more risk, I think, yes, you could find that out there. You could find a startup private company that can get you more than that. You could go into some of the coins that maybe now have to prove their way through all the others to get up to this status. However, when you look at it from a risk adjusted basis, I think Bitcoin is very safe. It's highly volatile, but I think it's safe. So from a risk reward, or say it the other way, which I like better, a reward risk ratio, Bitcoin is where it's at. I would happily 10x my net worth over the next 10 years versus sweating out the Trump coin or whatever crazy, whatever company it is. So if you're looking to make those returns, I think you have to kind of start your own company to be able to ride it up that much higher. So good question. All right, any other questions out there?
Sir. When I think about a doomsday scenario, what would drive the price down? Regulatory capture or control is one of those scenarios, and we're moving the other way as a country right now. But do you ever see a world where the U.S. government tries to capture capital gains on Bitcoin? And if so, how would they do that? Because that's the whole point of Bitcoin, right? You're outside the government.
Yeah. So to paraphrase that question, is right now it's regulatory easing. What could happen in a doomsday scenario to where now regulation goes in place that makes it either illegal or there's some attempt to capture capital gains on it, or a less favorable regulatory environment. So I would say 2 things. is one of the headwinds of crypto is that it's gone mainstream, and Bitcoin is because now it's not cool anymore, because it used to be the the kids in the dorm rooms rebelling against the, the establishment, and now you got Larry Fink, who's like poster child for the establishment out there saying that. So I do think there would be, I think ultimately that would be a negative scenario, but I don't think it would necessarily kill the price. It's kind of like if you started, poor analogy, but guns. If the government came down and cracked on guns, would the price of guns go down or skyrocket? Well, the hoarding would start, and then ultimately any price that would now be quasi black market kind of stuff, it would skyrocket. Again, poor analogy, but kind of that thought process. So, all right, what else? All right, thanks everybody for listening in. Again, a lot of questions can come out of this, so hit up your advisor, hit me direct, or just post on any of the places where we went live today, and we'd love to get you those answers. We'll talk to you soon.